Well, welcome everyone. My name is Don Hyder. I'm the Executive Director of the Markkula Center for Applied Ethics here at Santa Clara University. And one quick plug, the Markkula Center is the largest and most comprehensive applied ethics center in the United States. If you want to know more about what we do, just put Markkula or applied ethics into Google and you'll find us, or your favorite browser if it's not Google. Just a couple of quick notes. First of all, we want to thank our benefactors for this series, Bill and Ann Reagan. Thank you so much for supporting this annual series that we do. And before we get to our feature speaker, I want to introduce to you Subbu Vincent. Subbu, stand up and wave at everybody. Subbu is the Markkula Center's Director of Journalism and Media Ethics, and he focuses on developing tools and frameworks to advance new norms in journalism practice, ethical news product design, and new vocabulary and signals to help the public process and demand of ethical media. Subbu will be our question wrangler after Joan has spoken. So if you have questions as Joan is speaking, there are 3x5 cards on your chairs. Please write them down. We'll have you pass them towards the aisle. We'll collect them, pass them to Subbu. And if you're online, you can put them on the online function. We're monitoring that, and we'll get those also to Subbu to pass to Joan at the end. All right. So it's my great pleasure to introduce you Joan Donovan. Joan is one of the country's leading experts on misinformation and has been for a number of years. She currently serves as the research director of the Shorenstein Center on Media, Politics, and Public Policy, and she leads the Technology and Social Change Project. That project explores how media manipulation is a means to control public conversation, derail democracy, and disrupt society. Professor Donovan's work has been featured in a number of peer-reviewed journals, and she's frequently called on as an expert by NPR, PBS, the New York Times, The Atlantic, and many more. She's also the author of a very well-regarded book titled Meme Wars. Dr. Donovan received her Ph.D. in Sociology and Science Studies from the University of California, San Diego, and was a postdoctoral fellow at UCLA Institute for Society and Genetics, where she studied white supremacist use of DNA ancestry tests, social movements, and technology. Please join me in welcoming Joan Donovan.
Check, check. All right. You missed the most important part of my bio, which is that I am the co-founder of the beaver emoji, which is in everybody's phone, on Apple and Android, in all of your browsers everywhere. And I took up wanting to create an emoji just because I wanted to see how it gets done. And a lot of my research is about taking the time to understand how systems and processes and technology happens. Not to say theoretically about what the principles of a technology are or what the design features are meant to do, but looking at technology in practice and really trying to understand how things get done. And so what better way to figure out how an emoji appears in your phone than to go through the whole Emoji Standards Council application process, which includes designing the emoji. And the most challenging part of creating an emoji is figuring out something that isn't already an emoji that means the same thing in different places. And so in our application for the emoji, we had to explain, well, beavers are an important animal. And, one of the rebuttals was, well, does an otter, suffice? Can that stand in for a beaver? And I was just like, well, not for Canadians, there's something else going on there. We also made a few interesting alludes to what a beaver represents in terms of genitalia. So that part was also clutch for securing it. Just like the eggplant emoji has had its day. So that's probably the lightest part of today's talk, unfortunately, because today I want to talk a lot about meme wars and how the internet has changed politics, and how the way that we do politics now and the way that culture wars arrive at our doorstep, alongside the innovations of social media and technology, are new ways of participating in politics, of showing up in your political identity. And they don't always correspond strictly to, I'm, promoting this candidate, or I'm, for this particular policy, but they show up in very strange ways around culture wars, issues that are highly polarized, that are memes are meant to be, in some ways, disregarded. Political cartoons for a long time were things that people would see and they'd say, oh, well, it's not that serious, it's a cartoon, right? But if you look at the roles of political cartoons in propaganda, you realize they're actually incredibly important for mobilizing participation and for getting people to see more than just what an explanation can do. Memes have deeper resonances with our emotions, with our understanding of something much bigger that is happening. And sometimes memes act as a shorthand for that. So we're going to talk a bit about the stakes of why we study social media, why we think about social media as an important aspect of how politics and society comes together. And I wrote an article a while back where I concluded that it's not enough to batten down the hatches when a storm has already come ashore. Platform companies must stop providing safe harbor for medical misinformation, conspiracies, and grift that over time can erode the public's capacity to assess credible risk, right? And so it's not the same thing to stumble upon lies, hate, conspiracies in everyday life as it is to have that integrated into your networked media ecosystem. So when you go online, you are operating, many of us operate with this idea that somebody out there somewhere has checked this. Like somebody performed some kind of function. I've heard people come up with folk algorithms that say, oh, the first 3 results on Google are true. I'm like, who says what? And they're like, no, Google checked it. And I'm like, Google did not check it, and it could change day to day, right? And so, but the problem isn't necessarily that we lose our trust. It's we lose our capability to understand what's at risk. And it's important for us to understand and communicate risk. Journalism has a large role to play in communicating risk to people. And for a long time, our tech journalism was about how incredible technology is, how innovative Silicon Valley and entrepreneurship is, and how there's just money raining. I was surprised the trees don't grow money out here. I came out and I was like, I'm pretty sure the trees just grow money, right? And, under each ailing tree is some broken lime scooter, right? Which is to say that there's a lot of trials and errors, and the types of history that people write about technology tend to be stories of great men and great innovation. And we wanted to write a book more about the everyday uses of the internet and the everyday use of social media by people who see the internet as a primary means of participating in technology and in politics. So the way that we study this is really trying to assess, well, to what degree is misinformation and disinformation getting in the way of you experiencing freedom of expression? So there are actually 3 parts to the freedom of expression. Most Americans only know the first one, which is freedom of speech. You also have the right to seek and receive information. There is a right to truth. And so Deirdre Mulligan, who's over at Berkeley, has written a beautiful paper called Rescripting Search about what happens when you Google, did the Holocaust happen? And what are the responsibilities of search engines to give you the truth? Because unfortunately, there are people who wake up every day, have a cup of coffee, and create fresh and relevant content saying the Holocaust didn't exist. Most of us don't prioritize going online every day and saying, well, the Holocaust definitely happened, right? And so the idea that the truth will somehow win out doesn't take into account things like common historical facts, which are relatively settled. Instead, what would happen when you would search for Until Her Paper, which created a massive intervention by Google, but before her paper, if you searched for did the Holocaust happen, you were likely to get directly in contact with anti-Semitic groups. And the research that I did on white supremacy online, when you looked at the kind of content white supremacists often look for or write about, things like quote-unquote black on white crime, it would bring you directly to white supremacists, not to literature about white supremacy or about history, but directly in contact with white supremacists. And this is something that Dylan Roof, who was the mass murderer at AMC Church in Charleston, South Carolina, that's how he found himself community and self-radicalized when using search, as he searched for black on white crime. So when we're thinking about misinformation, though, we want to have a couple of rubrics in mind. So misinformation is information whose inaccuracy is unintentional, spread unknowingly. This is sometimes thought about as the my uncle has brainworms kind of thesis, which is that, you know, people will always be bullshitting on the internet. What we consider the truth, though, requires quite a bit more resources in order to, the truth is produced, right? Through method, through study. In journalism, the truth is produced through research and sourcing. Disinformation is different because disinformation has been with us a very long time, but the current problem of digital disinformation isn't just someone's telling a lie, but that lie is reaching millions of people. So the big difference here is that disinformation is information that is deliberately false or misleading, often spread for political gain, profit, or to discredit a targeted individual, group, movement, or political party. So disinformation isn't always a profit motive. It could have a political, it most likely has a political motive. And so the same rails that you would use online to sell your wares, the kind of advertising technology that you would employ to, you know, make sure people know that your pizzas are 2 for $1 in downtown, is the same rails that carry political information. And instead of selling a product, they're selling an ideology, they're selling a candidate, they're selling a point of view. And they can use all kinds of advertising tools to target you and get at that thing that might motivate you to spread that information, to participate. So when I think about misinformation and disinformation, it's really about figuring out what the intent is and who the providers are of that information, and do they intend to deceive? And that's really hard to do without employing open source intelligence methods or investigative journalism methods. Because the one thing about disinformation is it's meant to trick you. It's designed specifically for you to be fooled. And so one time I got really tripped up where someone had made this fake article that said that someone in New York City was selling Chuck E. Cheese tokens as Bitcoins. And I was like, that's that New York entrepreneurial spirit, right? It wasn't true, but I was like, I wanted to believe, right? Just like the X-Files. So when we study misinformation and disinformation, though, what we're really looking at is the tactics. And that tactic is usually media manipulation, which is to utilize media in a way that is somewhat deceptive or unfair, perhaps even artful, in order to trick an audience or to dissuade or to use persuasive techniques to persuade an audience of one thing or another. And where we look for media manipulation is through this ABCD model. We look for actors, we look for behaviors, that is, sometimes the lie isn't, with actors, sometimes the lie is that someone's impersonating someone else. With behaviors, sometimes the lie is that they've purchased a little bit of advertising to juice the distribution of the content. The content could be a straight up lie that they just made something up out of whole cloth. Design is different because the design of platforms, particularly social media products like Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube, the design inherently has one singular purpose, which is to scale information. It takes whatever content you put in it, and it cranks up the volume on that content. And for the most part, the design of these systems is advertising infrastructure. Because the same thing that a marketer would use to pay for a promoted tweet, you get to use, quote unquote, for free as someone that's participating in the creation of content or is trying to reach your friends and family. That's the same exact kind of infrastructure that advertisers are paying for. And so the content, oftentimes, if it's paid for, gets a pass, just like the content that we create, because of a law called, and I'll say it really quietly, Section 230, so that the lawyers don't come running. But this law treats all content the same way and says that the companies that distribute the content are not liable for what the content is. And that might make sense for a telephone company, because who could know if someone's running, a small bookie operation, a small gambling operation through the telephone, right? We wouldn't want people to be monitoring our telephone calls. But social media is something a little bit different because it occupies a quasi-public place. Public figures use it. It's used for broadcast. It's used to distribute news. It's used to distribute resources and products. And all of these things are happening all at once. It's the radio, it's the television, it's the newspaper, it's all of this and more. And so when we think about regulating technologies, often what happens is we start to talk about the design, and it's easy to say, oh yeah, but that's just a bad actor using the technology. We hear very similar cases in terms of gun regulation and gun violence. They say it's, guns don't kill people, bad people with guns kill people, right? But there's something else happening here that's given over an advantage to the human in the loop, which is why I have this image up here, which I really love, of a record player, someone's playing content. You can imagine that's, maybe it's a Clash record or something quite fun. And, the company that makes the record player and the company that makes the record might think about each other because they have similar standards they have to abide by. The record has to spin at a certain speed. That means the record has to be encoded a certain way. And standards do dictate quite a bit about how interoperability happens. And the speaker maker might, think a bit about, the quality of the sound and is it going to sound better on record or on CD. But nobody at the phone company is thinking about this idiot grabbing their telephone and, playing a song for their best friend, right? Now you can imagine one person on the line, 1,000 people on the line. It doesn't really matter much because what the human introduces is this unpredictability. And humans one-on-one introduce different kinds of unpredictability. But at scale, when we're talking about the ingenuity of hundreds or thousands of people, when they get a hold of something that they want to have their say on, social media is such an important technology because they can have that voice and they can shout it as loud as they want. Now, for the most part, most things that get posted on the internet are utterly not a problem. They're actually not even that entertaining. Right? If you see another picture of a spaghetti dinner on Instagram, who cares? Who cares about your children? Who cares? No, I'm kidding. Who cares about your new baby? I don't care. Right? But the point is that at some point during the design of social media and the intentionality of this company and this style of participating in tech, there was an early ethic of get big fast. right? So you've probably heard move fast and break things, but within the tech economy, get big fast is really what's happening. It's driving many of the business models, and it's a reason why we don't have a lot of guardrails on design. Get big fast means don't worry about logins. If thousands and hundreds of thousands and millions of people want to create fake accounts, those are good key performance indicators, right? Those users matter, right? And so there's not a lot of reason to set up barriers to sign up on social media or barriers to spam content unless the public asks for design changes and the public gets involved. So why does this matter? I'm going to talk about what we call the media manipulation life cycle, and I'm going to run you through this wheel very specifically. But when we were trying to study and understand what we meant by media manipulation campaigns, I thought a lot about data life cycle models. I thought a lot about narrative and story. I thought a lot about how do people write op-eds. They write them like a recipe. And so I said, essentially, if we want to study media manipulation as an event, we need to understand 5 points of action. 1, where's the media manipulation campaign being planned? What are its origins? 2, how is it spreading across the internet? 3, and this is the most consequential point, who responds? So every day, some idiot is wrong on the internet. That isn't misinformation. That's not media manipulation. Really, it's when it gets the attention of someone newsworthy and it begins to scale because some politician retweeted it or some actor reposted it on Instagram that we get into problems, and then journalists engage with it. Stage 4, mitigation, was something we didn't really have a lot to put into back, I would say, in 2016. Anytime you would say, it's really harmful to infrastructure people like Alex Jones and give him the power to broadcast to millions of people because he's harming people by motivating his audience to go and do their own research and investigate Sandy Hook. And the line from platform companies was always ostensibly that, what am I trying to say here? The line from platform companies was, we are a place for free speech. We don't talk about content. And that changed over time as more and more political actors got into the space and were able to turn what we might call assets or affordances of social media into vulnerabilities. And so the last thing we look at is the adaptations by different media manipulators. So here's the case study. I'm going to go through it pretty quickly, but you'll get the gist of it. So Sam Hyde is a well-known figure in online spaces as someone who is, some people might describe him as a comedian, some people might describe him as a misogynist, other people might describe him as a white nationalist. But Sam Hyde used to have a show on Adult Swim. It was a skit show where he was called $1 Million Extreme, and he was introducing all of these concepts that were popular online to more mainstream audiences. And one of the memes that emerged out of the communities that were surrounding Sam Hyde was this meme, he can't keep getting away with it. So he took this picture of himself posing as a white nationalist with dyed blonde hair and a gun. And since 2015, he's been identified online as a shooter in San Bernardino, Kalamazoo, Hessington, Kentucky, Minneapolis, Planned Parenthood Clinic in Colorado Springs, U.S. Naval Base in San Diego, U.S. Air Force Base in San Antonio, the war on Ukraine, among many others. And the way that this meme circulates is the same every time, which is that some horrible breaking news event will happen, and people will start posting this picture of Sam Hyde and say, he can't keep getting away with it. So we saw this happen in several different instances. The UCLA shooting suspect, Sam Hyde, was noted white supremacist and Donald Trump supporter. Again, he is part of the joke. So he has put these images of himself online to be used in these ways. And some kids also do this. If you'll see on Facebook pages of local police, they might say, we're looking for a suspect, blah, blah, blah. And friends will link their Facebook friend, their other friends from high school and say, Tony can't keep getting away with it, and it's just, it's a funny thing. Trust me, it's very funny. And then Bill O'Reilly tweeted about Sam Hyde at one point, where he was saying white supremacist Sam Hyde and others unconfirmed as of yet, San Bernardino. So that vulnerability in breaking news in and of itself is something that we constantly see flooded with misinformation. And then once people believe that there's a suspect that is that we're looking for, the unfortunate consequence of having all of our information circulating in the same platforms is that the FBI and journalists and shit posters on the internet and trolls are all occupying the same space online. And so you see journalists pick up this meme and quickly get it into circulation without vetting. So I'm going to show you how this happened with Sam Hyde, and let's see if this works.
And are you learning any more about how investigators are now piecing information together? Do you know anything about the attacker?
We don't. It was reported to me that he's actually not from this community. Apparently, his name was released as Sam Hyde. That was the name I was given. We don't know anymore.
So that was Representative, a local politician that was being quoted on CNN, and they were, they went to the scene, they got someone on the phone, they said this guy will be an appropriate source to interview. And I'm sure what happened was that right before he went on, one of his aides came up to him and said, they're calling him Sam Hyde, right? And they got that information from the internet, and then it instantly scales. Because once you have a credible source naming the wrong individual, then all hell breaks loose, because then other people can quote CNN, right? And that's how these disinformation cascades happen very quickly. And so mitigating Sam Hyde's actually proven to be pretty difficult. So the way that critical press have approached it is by writing debunks. We have critical press from the New York Times, Business Insider, as well as BuzzFeed. These are all available online. So if you do search for Sam Hyde, you're going to get these debunk articles that are already out there. And then there was some fanfare in 2016 where he lost his show after BuzzFeed reported on it as a quote-unquote alt-right show when that term was more prominent. In 2018, he was reportedly banned from YouTube and Instagram, but he's been back for years. And he was recently suspended from Twitter for homophobic insults about Jeff Bezos. Say what you will about Jeff Bezos, but he may be a little gay. I don't know. But good for him if he is, right? It is. Is it June 1st? Oh, I didn't say rabbit this morning. Does anybody know that? Yeah, you're supposed to say it first thing in the morning for good luck. But anyway, happy Pride. So mitigation was something that was triangulated and looked at Sam Hyde as the actor, as the problem. But the problem actually lie in the design of social media, which was allowing this very same meme to scale over and over and over again. And so the manipulators just started adjusting a little bit of the content. And so here's an attempt to introduce Sam Hyde into critical discourse right at the beginning of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And there had been this video circulating of what was called the Ghost of Kyiv, which was supposedly an ace fighter who had taken down 5 Russian jets. That video was technically a flight simulator video. It wasn't an actual video of a plane flying. And the person that made that video thought it would be funny to put that out and say that, at this time when all of society is asking for NATO to send planes to Ukraine, there's this video that emerges that says the Ghost of Kyiv has arrived. And you saw that this account tweeted this image of it, of not just the video that was circulating, but tweeted this image of Sam Hyde photoshopped into this. I mean, it's really cheesy because you can never get a picture of a fighter pilot like this, right? But and the tweet reads, Ukrainian ice fighter pilot known as the Ghost of Kyiv, real name Samuel Hyde, a 36-year-old who was identified as the MiG-29 pilot accredited with downing 6 Russian jets. And it says breaking, and it says, you know, all of these hashtags that were popular. And this really engaged the algorithms in a way that is incredibly important. NSA Offfoot of the Georgia Project often says, algorithms don't care about your analysis. So not only did this touch on outrage, which people were trying to say, this isn't real, you know, this is misinformation, and then other people were jumping in because they were part of the Ukrainian diaspora and they thought it was true. And this gave them hope. And one of the most important emotions that you can have online to motivate people is hope. Outrage is the other one. And so then you have Adam Kinzinger, maybe somebody's heard of him, you know, a sitting representative. He writes, the Ghost of Kyiv is the name, and he has absolutely owned the Russian Air Force. Godspeed and more kills, Samuel. Right? And so he jumps in and repeats it, and then the news becomes newsworthy, right? Instead of a prank or a joke, you then have Reuters having to devote resources to fact-checking and saying, Sam Hyde is not the Ghost of Kyiv. Again, very recently, the mass murder in Nashville, the name of the school shooter wasn't something that had been released very early, and people had superimposed this image and this face on Sam Hyde, and then called him Samantha Hyde. And then we had to have another Snopes write a fact check of this. And so the power of the internet in the multitude is something that is incredibly overwhelming in moments of breaking news. But it doesn't hurt the platform companies to actually look out for this. We all know that we all know. And so why aren't they ensuring that this doesn't circulate or doesn't scale to that level? So I'm going to take us back a little bit through meme history now, now that you have a sort of contemporary understanding of how meme wars and culture wars are fought online. I just want to check my time here. And so basically when we're talking about a meme, we're saying it's an idea, behavior, style, or usage that spreads from person to person within a culture. So memes are like the DNA of culture. We have to hear them, we have to see them, we have to understand where they come from. And advertising as an industry really takes advantage of this almost innate process for us psychologically to hear things and they stick. So memes that are sticky, memes that are anonymous are ones that tend to travel the most. Like we probably have all heard the saying, eat the rich, but probably none of us know where it comes from. But if I say, just do it, you know where that's from. I'm loving it. You know where that's from. Right? And so memes sometimes are useful in sloganeering. And even a poster like this, Uncle Sam's I Want You, didn't even begin in America. So many people think of Uncle Sam as this very unique image, this older gentleman representing the vitality of the nation, pointing out and interpolating you into the image and saying, I want you. This actually was a copycat campaign that had originally come through the London Opinion. And then later we've seen multiple thousands of iterations of this. And so when we decided to write the book Meme Wars, my colleagues Emily Dreyfus and Brian Friedberg, we really wanted to understand meme wars as the use of slogans, images, and video on social media in persuasive political campaigns. So we really just broke it down to a fundamentally very simple sociological set of concepts. And that helped us rein in what it was that we decided we were going to study when we were looking at internet and social media. And so we also understood that memes that travel very well, that go viral, tend to be authorless. They promote in-groups and out-groups. They tend to be sticky. And they promote remix or participation. So people online will take a meme and they'll change the slogan on it, or they'll change the image. And so many of our tools that are developed by technology companies are purpose-built to participate in meme culture online. It's not always a meme war. And if you don't know what something is, a meme has very little, it's not like when you turn on a movie on Netflix and you get 45 minutes in and you're like, I hate this movie. Like in the trailer didn't even represent it, right? A meme, you could go by like that, you don't get it, it's no foul, right? And so a meme like this, Pepe wants to make America great again. This, there's probably a few people in the room that remember and understand what Pepe is online. Other people are like, I don't get it, and that's fine, except for when it becomes fodder in a meme war. So I covered up with a black bar the sassy frog butt cheeks because I had to show this slide deck to Secretary Ash Carter at one point, and I was like, I just can't be the person that shows him frog butt cheeks. So Pepe walks into a bathroom, he drops trowel, and then his friend, who's a dog, shows up and says, whoops, and then later that day, his friend says, hey, Pepe, I heard you pull your pants all the way down to go pee. And then he says this very Freudian thing, feels good, man. And all the women in the room are like, I don't get it. And dudes are like, yeah, it would be weird if somebody's butt cheeks were flapping in the wind, right? All of our clothing with zippers and flies and buttons are constructed because men don't want to see each other's butts. We don't actually, elastic waistbands would work for the most of us. But, you know, our genes are gendered. But this little piece, feels good man, became one of the very first emojis, in a sense. People would use it to show kind of transgression. You know, I'm doing this thing, it's kind of bad, but it feels good, man. And so it became this internet sensation phenomenon. People like Katy Perry were posting about it. It didn't have the resonances it gained later under the Trump administration. So people started to remix it, and they started to make rare Pepes. Pepe is Trump, or Pepe is Hitler. And then we started to see a whole title shift in how Pepe was being used online. But let me take you a little bit of a detour through how politics got online. So people start to share Pepe, and they start to form bonds, and they start to form networks. And it's a language of its own online. But when we get to 2011, there's something that happens in our society globally around the Occupy movement. And this is where technology collides with society. And you have, for the first time, technologies that enable people across very vast distances to communicate instantaneously, virtually, for free. And so you saw groups using hashtags to bring together Occupy Wall Street protesters. I'm sure there was probably an Occupy Santa Clara. I know there was Occupy Oakland, Occupy OSF, or Occupy SFO. And what it meant was that groups of like-minded people could find each other online, and they could realize that there was some affinity and that there was support and that people were serious about going out and sleeping in public spaces. Didn't make a lot of sense if your friend was explaining it to you. Like, we're going to go sleep at the city hall in Los Angeles, and you're like, that's weird. Like, I don't know how that's going to accomplish social change. But nevertheless, there was this fever around it because of what was happening online. And then by 2016, you have politicians finally catching up to what social movements had, which was a first mover advantage using social media. And you get people like Bernie Sanders, who has a whole Facebook page dedicated to people making memes about him. These memes are targeted at someone like me. They're all punk band logos that have been redesigned for Bernie. And then there was this attempt at meming by Bernie's team. But because Bernie Sanders wasn't anonymous, it didn't circulate that well. Do you guys remember that moment when the Snow White of a man, Bernie Sanders, looked into the eye of the little dove or whatever that landed on his podium, and everything was right in the world for just a second? Well, his social media manager was like, print it! Let's get this out there, Bernie Sanders. And it just kind of flopped because people weren't necessarily wanting to spread political messages. They wanted to spread messages that resonated with their in-groups. And then Trump came on the scene, and it was like anything was up for grabs. So he started using the meme "build the wall," which was synonymous with white supremacist, white vigilante organizing by the Minutemen in 2004. Stop the Steal was invented in 2015. Roger Stone had registered the URL of Stop the Steal because he thought Trump was going to lose the primaries. And then Lock Her Up was another Roger Stone. And you can kind of start to see that this pattern of 3-word phrases, getting people to chant it, getting people to feel it, and to know more than just lock her up, that was a reference to Hillary Clinton, that was a reference to these deeper-seated ideas about the deep state, and that Trump was colluding with the deep state in order to lock her up. And then he tweeted this, which was pretty strange. It's just a lot of errata in a video saying you can't stump the Trump, and this picture of him as Pepe. And a lot of people that cover journalism were like, I don't get it. Why is he Green Frog Man? All right, this doesn't make any sense to me. But Trump was really trying to make an inroad with younger generations of people online, specifically ones that had started to use Pepe to identify themselves as the quote-unquote alt-right. And then he also tweeted this, "Crooked Hillary makes history." And this image was something that he got brought up in interviews, and he said, that's not racist. There's no dog whistles there. That's just a 6-pointed sheriff's star. It wasn't even a Fox News poll. Like, this was entirely a made-up meme that came from, and the only reason why he deleted it is because the source was Stormfront, which is a neo-Nazi message board. And so these are the kinds of things that Trump's team is using in 2016 to get his audience pumped up. But he's communicating to way more people than your typical political campaign. And then you had Hillary, meme magician. This is the best meme out there, right? I'm with her, the fuchsia shirt. First rule of social media is not to use an apostrophe or punctuation in a hashtag. If you have ever been employed as a social media consultant, it just breaks the hashtag. So she was still running a postcard campaign, a door-knocking campaign, right? They're showing up with these postcards saying, I'm with her, vote for Hillary, go to her link and, commit to vote for Hillary. And she just gets outmoded. So I showed you this earlier. How many people knew that was disinformation? Yeah, you got one, right? This was entirely made up on a Reddit message board full of Donald Trump fans called the Donald. And what they did was they went on the internet and they looked for pictures of what they considered to be weak men, and men that looked like they would participate in a campaign to draft my wife. They wanted to look for weak liberals, basically. So this is actually my friend Aaron. I went to college with him. He's a Canadian pediatrician. And what happened was someone took his picture from his wedding Flickr. It was the best he's ever looked, right? and stuck the Hillary Clinton branding on it. And not only did they do it to him, but they did it to other people as well. So he died for his country. Now it's her turn. And then they did it with this. My wife's son asked me when mommy's coming home. I told him when she's done beating Russia, right? And these things were getting littered all over Twitter at the same time that Hillary was trying to mount her campaign. And for the most part, you couldn't get anybody in 2016 to pay attention to content moderation. Because who was to say this wasn't fans of Hillary that were making their own memes that wanted her success? But this is the origins and the genesis of groups of people, domestic, figuring out that if you use social media to work together, you can create anything, any kind of reality. And then later she tried to punch back. She says that, essentially that Pepe is an alt-right symbol, that the alt-right is, Trump's private army, and that the alt-right and the basket of deplorables comment, which ended up becoming a rallying cry for anti-Hillary folks, really caught on. And there was not a very good way for people who want to campaign online to combat all the media manipulation and misinformation that's happening. And the more she excited and called out these folks that weren't necessarily big Trump stans, like they weren't like, oh, you know, to die for MAGA. These folks saw an opportunity to participate in a meme war and did it because it feels good, man, right? And so where does this culminate? So Richard Spencer, who coined the phrase the alt-right and owned altright.com on January 2017 during the day of festivities at inauguration, he is well known for being punched in the face. And what you don't know is that he was being interviewed about this pin that he was wearing, which was a Pepe pin. And he was saying that it's a way for us to identify each other. And then the actual comic book artist that had originated Pepe, once it was declared a hate symbol by the ADL, he killed off Pepe in a comic, basically saying that he wasn't going to allow this to be driven, or he wasn't going to allow his character to be driven in this way. So let's go back now to the beginning. What does it have to do with Sam Hyde? What does it have to do with meme wars? What does it have to do with the ingenuity of humans and the lack of ethical practice on social media platforms? Well, the Buffalo Manifesto, the Buffalo shooter, was someone who really wanted to be seen and admired by other white supremacists. And so throughout the Buffalo Manifesto are images like this, memes that say you wait for a signal while your people wait for you. It's using the sonorod, which is a well-known white supremacist symbol. And he writes, what do you want? And then that clause right there, which I'm not going to say, is known as the 14 words, which is a neo-Nazi slogan. And then he does this. He says, and this is my most recent photo, or my most recent self-pictures are below. And journalists saw this in the manifesto and thought, well, if he's going to print pictures of himself, we should reproduce these pictures, right? But he's just doing the meme, you know, and at the bottom he says, the truth is my personal life, blah, blah, blah. But this picture was something that journalists picked up, thinking that if you were so serious as to go commit mass violence, why would you be joking around in your manifesto? And the point isn't to communicate any longer with the press, which a lot of manifestos do. You think about the Unabomber or other kinds of manifestos that are targeted at the press. The point is to reproduce the meme of the shooter, right? Of the mass murderer, right? And these have significant political importance for our time. And so what do? I've advocated in some papers for a whole of society approach to mitigating misinformation. That including public health sector, news, civil society organizations, government, tech companies, university researchers, advocates, and activists, as well as quote-unquote network publics that are people who care deeply about certain issues. And I do think that the problems that tech companies are causing are not just a simple reflection of the wedges that already pre-exist in society. They're amplifying and making more divisive and scaling these problems in ways that are turning out to be very dangerous, especially when they're pointed at small groups of underrepresented or vulnerable groups. If you think that the war on trans people right now is just endemic of a wave of attention that Caitlyn Jenner got a couple years ago, it's not. It's entirely manufactured meme war in order to call upon this group of people that, for most part, do not want to be held out as public figures. They just want to live their lives, right? And they're constantly being attacked and told to attest for their own self-existence. And, you know, a year ago, it was critical race theory and similar optics, similar actors, similar behaviors, similar types of content, similar design. And we're going to keep seeing this happen until platform companies stand on their principles and say they will do no harm. So what is the fate of media and technology? Fate being fairness, accountability, transparency, and ethics. And I like this framework because I think fairness, accountability, and transparency are a lot of policies that one can put in place. But ethics are what you do when policies, norms, and laws fail you, civil disobedience is a kind of ethical practice. And so I think that if we differentiate between policies that achieve fairness, policies that achieve transparency, policies that achieve accountability, ethics still has to be there, because you have to be able to say at some point, I know this is the policy, but it's hurting other people. I know this is how the technology works, but it's hurting vulnerable groups of people. And so what we've had happen is literacy and education campaigns about the dangers of cyber stalking and cyber bullying, and don't click on links that you don't know who they're from, and certainly don't download PDFs. Fact checking was a big boon in the 2019, 2020. Data consortiums for auditing, they came and went. Algorithmic or technocratic redesign, sometimes you'll get a little bit of redesign on the edges of a technology product as long as it doesn't affect the design. Regulation, laws, and corporate policy have been a mishmash, but we haven't really seen anything substantive. Thank you. And then hiring people. At one point, Facebook was like, we hired 100,000 more content moderators. And you're like, but in proportion to what? Right? Don't tell a sociologist what you're doing without giving me the denominator, right? And so there are other ways, though, that we can go about this. Open access for scholarly research. We could do civil society audits, training and workshops and tip sheets for journalists, responsible scaling of platforms through evidence-based policy, regulation for online advertising. These are all things that could happen in useful ways. And then also I have this crazy idea of having librarians get into the fight against disinfo by doing things like archiving information from politicians in the public interest, information management, that is better curation of things that are life and death issues, better classification systems, so when you search for things, you get more than just what you're looking for, but you get a whole series of other things that might fall within that genre. It's sort of like when you go to the library and you start to look around at the shelf and you might be interested in these other things. Very discrete and tight content taxonomies need to happen. We need better classification. The world in which everybody classifies their own information online worked until it scaled. And then, I can sign up on Facebook today and say I'm a news organization, and then, and I just post pictures of my cat. And then curation of search. I think that's where we need to go, is that we need better search curation in the long run. And then I have some other things, but we don't need to go through that. And then to close, I would say that what are the fate of meme wars? And I've written a lot about this, but I do think that we've entered into a sea change with social media where the first mover advantage that social movements had is over. And so no longer an emerging technology imbued with the possibility of fostering social change by giving voice to small groups. Social media has become a tool of the powerful to dominate, harass, and coerce vulnerable groups. If we don't acknowledge this shift, the freest speech will benefit only those who are already powerful. Thank you so much, and thank you to you for having me.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Joan. That was fantastic. Actually, if you listen to the whole thing over again once or twice, I will learn more each time. There was just so much in it, especially on the meme examples we had. I've already gotten a whole bunch of distinctive inputs here, questions as well, and I'm getting more as we speak. And just
spoken like a data scientist. Distinctive inputs.
Because I was hoping
I'm going to call questions that from now on.
I was hoping we'll get a lot of overlapping questions, so I'll ask like one or two thematic ones and we'll be done with it, but they're not that overlapping, so that's what's interesting about them. And for folks online, if you have to actually submit anything, you can use the form that's in the email that you used. We just have a whole bunch here, and our hard stop is 5:15, just to let you folks know. So we've got about 20 minutes, I think. So just quickly on the last few slides, Joan, would you think there's a basis for literacy about memes in just everyday media use? You've kind of gotten into it. Do you think it'll help break the media manipulation cycle at all? Just looking at something and saying, oh, this might be a meme, I'm in group, out group, that sort of thing?
Yeah.
Will it help?
So we've done a lot of what Whitney Phillips calls troll training of journalists. And so getting journalists to understand that the internet is its own beat has been something that I've been very focused on. Because what's interesting about your more traditional shoe leather reporters that say go out on a political campaign and they're with the candidate all day long is they tend to report on what they see and they hear. But you have this whole group of internet reporters that are technology reporters. They're usually in the business division of news organizations. So they might know a bit about internet culture because they're younger and they've been raised on the internet, but they do need to understand how they're being manipulated and what it is that they're being targeted with. And so we offer, and I've been offering for years, along with one of my colleagues, Eleanor Dreyfus, free trainings for journalists to make sure that they're up to speed on these different tactics of media manipulators, as well as the content that might trip them up.
And what about people? So let's take journalists out and just say regular people online. Is there any need you feel or opportunity for just memes? Literacy?
I would love, this is what part of the reason why we wrote the book is like we wanted to give people a playbook for understanding how these things happen, how they scale, how they don't make sense to you in one area, but then you start to see this stuff happening in the mainstream media and you're like, where did that even come from? Right? And so doing provenance tracing online and understanding open source investigation techniques that can get you to that early space is critical. So I do a lot of training as well of civil society organizations and their researchers, because usually this happens most damagingly along very particular wedge issues. And these wedge issues will shift every couple of years, especially when it comes to elections and what's hot. They'll also shift according to local concerns. And so the kinds of misinformation and disinformation campaigns you might see in California around immigration don't really make sense in Massachusetts. And so you'll see very clear indications that a media manipulation campaign is coming, usually because it's failed 2 or 3 times already. A good example of this is a campaign that keeps coming back that's called It's Okay to Be White. And so you'll see, in this campus also was a victim of that campaign where students put up posters that just said it's okay to be white. And the issue is what they were trying to get is students and professors to take pictures of it and post it online and say, this is terrible. Why is this happening on my campus? And then the rebuttal would be, why do you think it's wrong to be white? Right? And this scaled all the way up to Tucker Carlson and Fox News. And then we were able to show that it was a campaign that originated on 4chan. But before that, 140 college newspapers wrote about it because it was a coordinated campaign that touched people's lives. We really try to focus on things that have this wires to the weeds effect, where it's not just that we see people doing things online, but that we see harmful effects in everyday life.
So I'm going to move to a couple of questions on the platforms. These were, this one we've actually talked about in our own work. Why does YouTube get so much less critical media attention than Facebook, Twitter, and so on?
It's so much harder to study. We don't have the same tools. So when Becca Lewis and I and others at Data and Society were studying YouTube, and I think we produced one of the first very critical reports of white supremacists on YouTube, we had to watch every video. We had to know who was on all of these different channels on YouTube. You had to be part of the underground, part of the subculture of it to understand how it ebbed and flowed. It wasn't the case that people were using very clearly demarcated content tags and you could just round out a bunch of the metadata and make sense of it. You had to watch the videos to understand what was happening. And what was happening in these videos essentially is that the design of YouTube changed, and YouTube allowed for revenue sharing with content creators. And they were trying to compete with platforms like Twitch and other spaces that allowed you to play video games and get donations right away. So YouTube was like, well, we want people streaming on YouTube video games, and we want them to be able to get automatic donations. And that feature that was meant to be good for a community and to support content creators just got co-opted by white nationalists who were like, yeah, if you want to support the cause, if you want to support me, if you want to support my podcast, you know, we go live on YouTube and they get those super chats. I pointed this out to YouTube and they did nothing about it. And then I worked with BuzzFeed and Craig Silverman on a project about it. And they actually sat there and counted how much money certain white nationalists were making using YouTube and then presented YouTube with that data. And it was pretty damning. You could make anywhere from, you know, $2,000 to $5,000 to $8,000 to $16,000 a day as a content creator if you really ginned up the outrage and did racist acts in public that you were live streaming. And so that was something that when we were studying it, you know, you sit there and you think, if I can find it and I'm just like an idiot living in Los Angeles in my dining room at my table, why can't they? You know, I mean, I don't have any specific tech skills. I just know how to find a scene.
So actually that dovetails nicely into this one. Can companies objectively in quotes, objectively filter out all content that isn't true? And where do the company's own biases come into play, even if they attempt it?
Yeah, we didn't build systems for knowledge. So one of the things that I recommend that we do is we start to build systems that include some proportion of what I call TALK, which is timely, accurate, local knowledge. These are the kinds of civic information that we need to participate in our daily lives, that we, you know, can know what's happening in our cities. These are the roles that newspapers used to fulfill. The reason why I say knowledge instead of news is that we have to be open to the fact that other formats might do this better than newspapers, right? And so we have to think about, well, what is the proportion of timely, accurate, and local knowledge that are flowing through timelines and news feeds? And you've seen attempts by, say, YouTube to interject a news tray that was to stop when there was a breaking news event and they didn't have the news tray on the homepage. A lot of people would go live and make up stuff in order to try to get an audience and to get donations. Same on Twitter, but it wasn't as incentivized because there was no automatic donation linked to it, or with Facebook as well. So the issue is essentially that if we don't come back and understand the incentives driven by design, then we're not going to understand what the quality of the content is that is being circulated on the platform. And that quality is really hard to do for free. And so one of the things that I think about a lot is all of the things that you're able to click on the internet has essentially failed to be monetized in other ways. I mean, knowledge is not cheap, and it is behind paywalls and subscription services and whatnot. And so I do think that there's no world in which the internet is true, in the sense that you can't, there's no institution, even in academia, we have processes in place so that we can't scam our colleagues, right? And we, peer review, things like that require us to be invested in a field and invested in our own capacity as gatekeepers to keep the integrity of the field intact. And I think that we're still dealing with very rudimentary forms of technology as a marker of knowledge. What we have is technology that distributes information in a rather haphazard way and can only get specific when you purchase particular kinds of either content or distribution online. And those aren't even that good. When it comes to advertising, it's not incredibly accurate. And it's, I think I read something like there's 30-something billion of loss every year in digital advertising because you don't know who is reading your ads. And so if we tried to solve that problem, maybe the quality of information might increase.
So if you go from that to what Twitter has attempted even before Musk actually bought it, the crowdsourced misinfo notes thing, trying to actually call it out, and other people are trying to use crowds as a way to tackle the overall issue of untruths. Do you see that as an approach to quality as part of the technological machine itself?
It's hard to know because I think I think in this moment, when we think about the quality of certain platforms, we're really thinking about who are the users. And so if you think that Twitter is infested with Nazis, spies, bots, influence operations, and maybe it's only, 1% of the entire content there, but if that's the only thing being covered in the news, a little bit of poison with dinner will kill you, right? And so when it comes to that reputation that you're asking for, I think that stems from CEOs taking on stands that say, we're going to take harder lines on this. And so you don't see the same kind of quantum of misinformation on different platforms because it's not that it doesn't exist entirely, but it is not routinely recommended. It's not incentivized. And if you do it, you will get kicked off the platform. And that ultimately is the way that platforms maintain their reputation, is by either, opening the floodgates and saying everything for everyone, or they get very serious about who their audience is. Pinterest's audience is momversation, right? And so they banned vaccine information, not good vaccine information or bad vaccine information, vaccine information. Why? Because they don't want that polarizing topic playing out on their platform.
So I got one of my questions.
Oh,
I'm going to
yes.
slide this in here.
Moderator's preference.
In the article that reported about your book at Harvard, there's a specific reference to memes about ethics in journalism. Mm-hmm. Is there an example that you could give where you could bring that actually?
There's literally movies being made about this meme. It goes back to a time online, which is also known as Gamergate. And so this is a moment where we first see the mass impersonation of a large group of people that have trouble rising up over the impersonation of them. And so in this instance, I'll skip over some of the backstory, but there was a controversy about this woman who had been dating one person and then broke up with them, and she released a video game called Depression Quest, and it got a lot of great reviews. But the game was much more cerebral than it was about the graphics and all of the things that we might, in our review of gaming, look at. It's, the characters didn't look really, buff, and it just was more of a text-based type of role-playing game, and it was supposed to help you with your mental health. But because of her ex-boyfriend who was upset with her, who published reams of their text messages and pictures of her, it started to build this momentum around this misogynistic take that women don't build good games, but rather they just have sex with the guys that are reviewing the games. And so that meme of it's about ethics in journalism stems from this very misogynistic take on this woman's relationship. But what ended up happening is that as young men became more and more attuned to critiques of video games by feminists, critiques of video games by other kinds of folks and all across the diversity spectrum, this started to take on a bit of a fever amongst these young groups of men that were trying to have a voice. And part of the way they were doing that was by saying, we don't want this in our games. Just leave our games alone. We want our own culture. If you're a woman, go get your own culture. This is us. This is boy stuff. And the women that were having an effect on this, though, were very respected YouTubers. They were on other social media sites, and they were ostensibly winning by being louder, by driving discourse around that. And the men then decided, using an anonymous message board to get coordinated, that they were going to launch this full-scale campaign where they impersonated Black women online and tried to make it seem ridiculous that Black women were basically, they launched this campaign called End Father's Day, trying to make it seem like Black women wanted to end Father's Day. The only outlet that picked that up was Fox News, who on Father's Day was saying, can you believe this? Social justice warriors online want to cancel Father's Day. And what ended up happening, which was really interesting, is that Black women online, cyber feminists online, and there's really great journalism on this if you look up Your Slip is Showing, they were able to catalog all of these imposter accounts, hundreds of them, that were pretending to be Black women online and were trying to make it seem as if their grievances about the gaming industry were outrageous because they wanted to end Father's Day and they wanted, everybody to be fired and canceled. And it was the first time that the platform, particularly Twitter, had to confront what they built, which is that they had made it so easy to impersonate and so easy to gang up on other groups of people that we started to develop this discourse about harmful social media products and how vulnerable groups are not getting the benefit of being heard, of not getting to be the voice of the voiceless or being connected in the way that Zuckerberg had imagined. I've been told to wrap it up 3 times now.
All right, and we have only like 30 seconds left, so we're going to have to stop the live stream really soon. So on that note, do you have 15 seconds for a quick answer on the future of AI and disinformation and social media?
Yeah. Wah, wah. I mean, I've written about this. There's a paper out there I wrote with my colleague Britt Paris called Cheap Fakes and Deep Fakes. And the idea that the fakes will get more and more individualized, that the fakes will be, harder and harder to spot. This we know is true. One of the things that we tried to do, though, in that paper was look back at the history of evidence in law and figure out, well, how did the law deal with the invention of photography and video evidence, and what do we know about that? And really it comes down to the distribution of mass technology and mass market, mass communication. But interestingly, I went in a different route and I looked at the history of the invention of the X-ray and how the X-ray was something that judges weren't going to just admit into evidence. They wanted to know, is this really a picture of the inside of your hand? And is this really an artifact of a broken bone? And so alongside the technology, we had to get experts that that developed particular ways of explaining X-rays and taking those images, and then they would have to be paid and brought into court and say, yeah, this is totally, Joan's broken hand, and it happened at work. The last thing I'll say about that, because I love to go on, is I've been really captivated by the history of counterfeit lately, and I've been looking at Rolex in particular and fandoms and trying to understand in the luxury market, they have a lot of ways of telling something is fake. And I'm imagining a future, especially in AI, which will attack celebrities first probably, is that we will get a fandom of groups of people that go and scavenge for these things and say, yes, this is Taylor Swift, no, this is not Taylor Swift. And I think that the public, unfortunately, always gets called upon to solve the problems created by entrepreneurs. And unfortunately, regulation is not going to be fast enough this time to forestall what's going to happen in the election. But it is my hope that really
ingenious technologists figure out how to reverse engineer these processes and these products so that we can have a more peaceful election.
All right, on that note, thank you everyone.